What's up everyone and welcome back to the World History Channel. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button today. Let's get started. 14 painful reminders that Thomas Jefferson was kind of an awful person. If being American were a sport, Thomas Jefferson would be in the running for all-time MVP. Jefferson was one of the best founding fathers, the primary author of the Declaration, a celebrated president, and the most popular character in Hamilton. America was founded on Jefferson's stated principles, especially those regarding life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, along with all men being created equal. Unfortunately, Jefferson himself really failed to live up to those lofty values. The great things that Jefferson did are eclipsed by the awful things he did. Jefferson's hypocrisy is fairly well known amongst Americans, but his status as a member of the Mount Rushmore Club has resulted in some of his outright terribleness being edited out of history. Thomas Jefferson possessed a number of admirable qualities and made a significant contribution to the establishment of the United States of America. He deserves his status as a good president, unlike certain other individuals such as Andrew Jackson. However, as you examine the stories of his life below, you'll be surprised to find how Jefferson lacks honor and is a bit of a nasty person. He was legislatively racist. Thomas Jefferson wasn't just racist in his private life. In his public life, Jefferson used his career as a politician, including his stint as the third POTUS, to enact plenty of discriminatory legislation and fight attempted advancements in equal rights. As a governor during the Revolutionary War, he encouraged enlistment by giving slaves to those who signed up. He also attempted to restrict free blacks from entering or exiting the states and tried to ban all children born of black fathers from entering. Most hypocritically, he attempted to expel white women who had birthed children with black men, despite his own fathering of children with Sally Hemings. He wanted to abolish slavery and return free blacks to Africa. Thomas Jefferson was a major slave owner, but he also campaigned in several ways to end slavery. Jefferson attempted to write a passage denouncing slavery in the Declaration of Independence, but was overruled by Benjamin Franklin and John Adams. He would go on to make other attempts. However, the fact that Jefferson continued to own slaves makes some believe that he only made those attempts for political reasons. Even though he was in favor of freeing the slaves, Jefferson was against giving them citizenship and had a plan to ship everyone, regardless of where they came from, back to Africa. Some believe that this was an attempt to get rid of his black descendants. Jefferson refused to emancipate Sally Hemings. Over a few decades, Sally Hemings bore Thomas Jefferson 7 children, 4 of whom reached adulthood. Some believe that Hemings maintained her relationship with Jefferson due to a promise that he would eventually grant her children their freedom, a promise that Jefferson later upheld. This sounds mildly commendable, although it should be noted that Jefferson dragged his heels on freeing them for fear of public appearances. Unfortunately, the same could not be said for Sally herself. Despite their romance, Sally remained Thomas's property right up until his death, after which his daughter quietly granted Ms. Hemings her freedom. Sally Hemings was a teenager, his slave, and trapped overseas with him when Jefferson began his affair. Thomas Jefferson's affair with Sally Hemings after his wife's death is well known. This relationship is sometimes portrayed as a forbidden romance between slave and master, but the truth is far more disturbing. When Thomas and Sally first started sleeping with one another, Sally was Jefferson's property and stuck overseas in France with him, meaning she didn't really have a choice. In addition to this, Sally may have been as young as 14 when the affair began. It would not be long after their return to American soil that Jefferson would impregnate her for the first time. He split up slave families as punishment. Despite the fact that Thomas Jefferson had a whole family with a slave, he had no respect for slave families. Jefferson was known for isolating rebellious slaves from their friends and families, and sometimes for good by selling off family members. In one awful incident, Jefferson gave away a family of slaves who happened to be related to Sally Hemings, and thus Martha Jefferson, as part of a wedding gift. Jefferson intervened to repurchase the family, that is, only the useful members, because the new owner wanted to sell the slaves and divide them up. Since he had no use for the others, Jefferson let them be sold to anyone who wanted them. He pioneered smear campaigns to destroy Alexander Hamilton and John Adams. Modern politicians are no strangers to smear campaigns and dirty politics, but these weren't always a part of the American scene. Thomas Jefferson deserves much of the credit for introducing smear campaigns to the American system. Thanks to the slanderous campaigns he secretly ran against Alexander Hamilton and John Adams. Jefferson hired James Callender as a pamphleteer, but in practice Callender was a minister of propaganda, helping to spread scandal and rumor about Jefferson's opponents. Callender helped the story of Hamilton's amorous affair get out and launched countless attacks against Adams's presidency. Ironically, Callender later turned on Jefferson and began spreading tales of his dalliances with Sally Hemings. Sally Hemings was half-sister to Martha Jefferson. Many sources believe that Sally was actually the half-sister of Thomas's wife, Martha Jefferson, as a result of her father's own dalliances with a slave woman. This makes Thomas's decision to start sleeping with Sally after Martha's death all the more troubling. In addition, there's the weird fact that he was okay with owning people who were technically family. Jefferson falsely accused his own vice president of treason. Presidents and vice presidents rarely go head-to-head, but Thomas Jefferson was able to make it happen with Aaron Burr, one of history's favorite villains. Burr, the man who would one day shoot Alexander Hamilton, was chosen by the electors as vice president. He was not picked by Jefferson, which is part of the reason the rules were changed. Jefferson eventually came to the conclusion that Burr was a part of a plot to commit treason and had him tried on official charges, but Burr was found not guilty. Their relationship was forever destroyed, if it had ever existed at all. Jefferson owned a ridiculous amount of slaves. It is common knowledge that Thomas Jefferson was a slave owner despite his beliefs in equality and liberty. However, the actual number of slaves that he owned isn't often talked about. Jefferson inherited 52 slaves when his father died. He had increased that to over 100 by the time he wrote the Declaration of Independence. At the height of his human-owning days, Jefferson owned 267 slaves, although he would later free some of them. Thomas Jefferson owned more human beings than most libraries at the time contained books. Jefferson hated on Haiti. As a slave owner, it makes sense that Thomas Jefferson would have mixed feelings about slave rebellions. Jefferson was all for revolutionary action by those of European descent, but he actively opposed any slave uprisings, including the popular movement in Haiti that became the Haitian Revolution. Jefferson provided the beleaguered slave owners of Haiti with economic and military support in an attempt to put down the rebellion, and refused to recognize the new state when the slaves were successful. He supported the worst of the French Revolution. Thanks to his time in France, Thomas Jefferson was a major Francophile and a major revolutionary. This made Jefferson an obvious fan of the French Revolution, and he continued to hold a high opinion of the event long after it had devolved into a period known as the Terror. The Jacobins waged a bloody war on all dissent as they enforced change upon France, and Jefferson was there to cheer them on every step of the way. Jefferson praised the Jacobins and their methods, which included famously using the guillotine to kill a lot of people at once. Jefferson employed political hatchetman while Secretary of State. The brand new United States of America's first Secretary of State was Thomas Jefferson. He served his country with distinction, but kept his not-so-glamorous attributes close at hand. Jefferson employed a professional hatchetman while in office, who was on the State Department's payroll with instructions to write anti-administrational articles to inflame public opinion. It could be argued that the notorious Francophile Jefferson used his position to advance French interests as much as he did American. He accused George Washington of treason. Thomas Jefferson and George Washington may share some real estate on Mount Rushmore, but that doesn't mean that the two got along. The duo shared a mutual dislike, which only grew as Jefferson became a vocal critic of Washington's presidency. At its worst, Jefferson's criticism accused Washington of being beholden to the British Empire and of committing outright treason against their new nation. Jefferson made these criticisms as public as possible. Given Jefferson's pro-France actions as Secretary of State, this was particularly hypocritical of him. He ignored contemporaries freeing slaves despite his own anti-slavery rhetoric. Some people attempt to downplay Jefferson's use of slavery by saying that he was a product of his time, but that's giving him too much credit. Jefferson may have lived in the days before slavery officially ended in America, but several of his contemporaries had already made a stand by freeing their slaves, including the first president, George Washington. Jefferson threw around as much anti-slavery rhetoric as anyone else, but he refused to put his money where his mouth was. If being American were a sport, Thomas Jefferson would be in the running for all-time MVP. Jefferson was a celebrated president, one of the most well-known founding fathers, the principal author of the Declaration of Independence, and even a fan-favorite character in Hamilton. He was also the principal author of the Declaration. He gave America its signature values: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But Jefferson's life and legacy are far more complicated, and at times deeply troubling. Despite his contributions to the founding of the United States, Jefferson failed in many crucial moral areas, making him one of the most hypocritical figures in American history. His life is a litany of contradictions: preaching liberty while practicing slavery, advocating equality while engineering policies that harmed marginalized communities, and playing a central role in building a nation while undermining its very ideals. The following painful reminders show why Thomas Jefferson was, in many ways, an awful person, whose dark deeds deserve just as much attention as his patriotic achievements. First, Jefferson was legislatively racist. He didn't just harbor private prejudice. He used his political clout to institutionalize discrimination. He encouraged enlistment as governor during the Revolutionary War by rewarding soldiers with enslaved individuals. He supported laws banning free black people from entering or leaving the U.S. and proposed that white women who bore children with black men be exiled. All this came while he, a white man, was fathering children with an enslaved woman. That enslaved woman was Sally Hemings. Jefferson refused to emancipate her, despite their decades-long relationship and the fact that she bore him at least 6 children. While he freed her children, eventually, Sally remained his property until his death. This portrays a man who used his privilege and power to control a person who had no real control over the relationship. Hemings was a teenager when their relationship began, and she was trapped overseas in France with Jefferson at the time, without the legal or social freedom to refuse him. This isn't just an uncomfortable detail, it's a stark depiction of coercion and abuse. Jefferson also inflicted cruel punishments on enslaved people, including separating families. As part of a wedding present to another family, he divided up enslaved family members of Hemings and his late wife. When the new owner decided to break up the family further, Jefferson only bought back the enslaved people he deemed useful, abandoning the others to be sold off. And while modern politics may feel like a battlefield, Jefferson pioneered the scorched earth tactics that still define dirty campaigns. He paid pamphleteers like James Callender to spread rumors and scandal about his political opponents, including his former allies John Adams and Alexander Hamilton. Ironically, Callender later turned on Jefferson, publicizing his relationship with Hemings. The twisted family dynamics don't end there. Sally Hemings was believed to be the half-sister of Jefferson's late wife Martha. That means Jefferson not only owned but had children with a woman who was his sister-in-law. He did not have a problem owning and controlling people to whom he was emotionally and biologically attached. Jefferson also turned on his own vice president, Aaron Burr. He accused Burr of treason, though he lacked solid evidence. Burr was acquitted, but Jefferson's willingness to weaponize the justice system reveals a vindictive streak. His contempt was not limited to foreign foes. Jefferson accused George Washington of treason, publicly claiming he was a British sympathizer. For a man who preached civility and unity, this was a direct betrayal of the very foundational bonds of the new nation. Finally, Jefferson had no reason to continue employing enslaved labor. His contemporaries, including George Washington, supported gradual emancipation or freed their slaves. Jefferson, despite writing anti-slavery rhetoric, continued to profit from and expand slavery. In sum, Jefferson's lofty ideals were often nothing more than a smokescreen. His personal life and political actions regularly betrayed the values he helped enshrine in American consciousness. He was not merely a flawed man of his time. He was a powerful leader who chose to use that power in ways that oppressed others. If we truly want to understand the origins of America's moral struggles, we must reckon with the full scope of Thomas Jefferson's legacy. 14 painful reminders that Thomas Jefferson was kind of an awful person. Thomas Jefferson is a candidate for the all-time MVP award if American citizenship were a sport. He was one of the most influential founding fathers, the principal author of the Declaration of Independence, a celebrated president, and even the most charismatic character in Hamilton. Jefferson's lofty ideals, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and the belief that all men are created equal served as the foundation upon which America was founded. Yet, Jefferson himself spectacularly failed to live up to these principles. His personal and political actions reveal a man who is riddled with hypocrisy, cruelty, and moral contradictions, despite his undeniable contributions to American democracy. His status as a national icon has often whitewashed his darker deeds, but a closer look at his life exposes a deeply flawed individual. Here are 14 painful reminders that Thomas Jefferson was kind of an awful person despite his genius. 1. He was legislatively racist. Jefferson wasn't just privately prejudiced. He actively promoted racist policies as a politician. During his time as governor of Virginia during the Revolutionary War, he provided white men who enlisted in the militia with bounties in the form of slaves. Fearing their influence, he tried to prevent free black people from entering or leaving Virginia. He proposed laws to expel white women who bore children with black men, a staggering hypocrisy, given his own relationship with Sally Hemings. Jefferson's racism wasn't just personal, it was institutional, shaping laws that reinforced white supremacy for generations. 2. He wanted to end slavery, but only to deport free black people. Jefferson claimed to be against slavery, but during his lifetime he owned over 600 slaves. His proposed solution to slavery was even worse. He supported colonization, the idea that freed black people should be forcibly sent to Africa, even if they had been born in America. His reasoning: he believed black and white people could never coexist peacefully, a belief that contradicted his own "all men are created equal" rhetoric. Some historians suspect he wanted to erase his own mixed-race children by shipping them away. Jefferson's stance wasn't abolition, it was ethnic cleansing disguised as benevolence. 3. He refused to free Sally Hemings. Sally Hemings, an enslaved woman, bore 6 of Jefferson's children. He eventually released their children, but he never released Sally. She was kept in slavery until he died, when his daughter Martha reluctantly released her. Jefferson likely kept her in bondage to avoid scandal, proving his reputation mattered more than her liberty. This wasn't a love story, it was coercion and control. 4. Sally Hemings was a teenage slave trapped overseas with him. The Jefferson-Hemings relationship was not a romance. It was exploitation. Sally was only 14 or 16 when Jefferson, who was 44 at the time, started dating her. She was his property, living in France with him, where she had no legal rights to refuse. She only returned to America after negotiating freedom for her future children, meaning she was forced into compliance. Calling this an affair whitewashes the power imbalance and abuse. 5. He split up slave families as punishment. Jefferson preached about liberty but had no qualms about destroying enslaved families. He routinely sold enslaved people as punishment, separating parents from children. In one case, he gifted a slave family as a wedding present, then allowed the new owner to sell off the unuseful members. He even separated siblings from Sally Hemings' family, keeping some while discarding others. His actions showed zero regard for black families, despite fathering children with an enslaved woman. 6. He pioneered political smear campaigns. Jefferson didn't just debate opponents, he destroyed them. He secretly hired James Callender, a scandal-mongering journalist, to smear Alexander Hamilton, exposing his affair with Maria Reynolds. Callender also savaged John Adams, calling him a hideous hermaphroditical character. Ironically, Callender later turned on Jefferson, exposing his relationship with Sally Hemings. Jefferson didn't just engage in dirty politics. He invented them. 7. Sally Hemings was his wife's half-sister, adding another layer of creepiness. Sally Hemings was likely the daughter of Jefferson's father-in-law, making her Martha Jefferson's half-sister. This means Jefferson slept with his dead wife's enslaved sister. He also owned his own children until they were adults. The familial and racial dynamics make this even more disturbing. 8. He falsely accused his own vice president of treason. Jefferson and Aaron Burr hated each other, but Jefferson took it too far. After Burr, his VP, killed Hamilton in a duel, Jefferson accused him of plotting treason. Burr was put on trial but acquitted due to lack of evidence. Many historians believe Jefferson fabricated the charges to ruin Burr's reputation. This was political vengeance, not justice. 9. He owned a staggering number of slaves. Jefferson preached freedom while owning 600+ slaves in his lifetime. He inherited 52 slaves from his father. By the time he wrote, "All men are created equal," he owned over 100. At his peak, he enslaved 267 people, more than most libraries had books. Forced labor provided the foundation for his opulent Monticello lifestyle. 10. He hated Haiti for freeing its slaves. Jefferson supported revolutions, unless they were black-led. When Haiti overthrew slavery in 1804, Jefferson refused to recognize the new nation. He even helped French slaveholders by imposing an economic embargo on Haiti. His fear: a successful slave revolt would inspire U.S. slaves to rebel. His hypocrisy was on full display. 11. He cheered on the French Revolution's bloodiest phase. Jefferson loved France, even during the Terror. While thousands were guillotined, Jefferson called the violence necessary. He praised the Jacobin extremists, dismissing their atrocities as the tree of liberty must be refreshed with blood. Meanwhile, he condemned slave revolts as barbaric. His double standard was glaring.